We're currently at the 300 level, pushing to the 400 level. In order to easily get to 400, you need to understand two major tactics. You need to understand hanging pieces, which is when the opponent's piece is just not being guarded and you just capture it and you don't hang your pieces. You also need to understand counting. And this is when you're able to see the amount of attacking pieces on a square versus the amount of defending pieces on a square. The game plan at this level, anything below 500, is to only focus on your development, get all your pieces out, castle your king, swing your rooks in the game, then use pawn breaks to open lines for your rooks and your queen. And eventually, once you're doing this, your opponents will blunder. Don't try to attack quickly. They will do the heavy lifting for you. Let's hop into it. So we're currently 300 in our speed run. Let's start by playing e4. And our opponent is playing the Scandinavian defense. At this level, opening is still not important. And then c6 was played. This is definitely a sacrificial opening where if I take on c6, the knight take on c6, and black is basically developing their pieces. We don't want that. We want to develop our pieces. So let's not be greedy. In the opening, let's play the move pawn to d4. And from here, we're just trying to develop all our pieces as quickly as possible. If your rating is 300, you really just need to ensure that you follow the opening principles, don't blunder. Your opponent will do all the work for you. So pawn g6, I need to develop 4 of my minor pieces. That's 1 out of 4. Bishop g7, that's 2 out of 4. 2 more, get the king castle, and then the development is going to be complete. And as we said before, the opponent just played e5. So at this level, you don't have to try to do any heavy lifting. Just develop your pieces. Your opponent is going to blunder. I mean, I have 2 pieces covering the e5 square. He's only covering the e5 square with his bishop. So once I take on e5, just like that, now we're ahead by 2 pawns, not just 1 pawn. And if this takes, we're able to take back. Knight d7 was played. I mean, black is trying to develop the knight, but it is blocking out this bishop. Let's do some counting. There are 2 pieces attacking my pawn on e5. I only have 1 piece guarding it. So let's play the move knight to f3. Now we have 2 pieces protecting the pawn on e5. Remember, counting is very important at the 300 level. If you want to move past 300, you have to ensure that you're good at counting, and you have to ensure that you're good at identifying unprotected pieces and hanging pieces. Here's another example of counting. Dude just played knight to h6. I'm attacking the knight once. He's guarding it once. What am I going to do? I'm going to play the move queen to d2. Now I'm attacking the knight twice. This is called a batcher as well. And a batcher basically means there's 2 pieces doing the same work on the same diagonal. The opponent did not see this. These are the simple threats that you need to pass 300. And once the king castle, we simply take the knight on h6. Just like that, we're ahead by a piece. Bishop takes e5 was now played, and that's another mistake because the bishop on g7 could have took on h6, but chose to take on e5. Now, if you look on my bishop on h6, it is attacking the rook on f8. Now, this is called a profitable exchange. You just have to be able to be good at math. The bishop is 3 points, the rook is 5 points. We take the 5 points. Even though we know we're going to be losing our 3 points, we're going to be gaining 2 points in exchange. So queen takes was played, and now I just need to complete my development. Bishop takes e3 was played. Usually it's not good to be giving up your bishops for knights, but let's just get rid of this bishop. Okay, queen to e8 check. All right, that's kind of an annoying check because I didn't want to pull my bishop back, but I have to pull my bishop back. We're ahead by 6 points in this position though, so I'm now trying to start an attack on the opponent's king. And keep in mind, trading queens also does the job. The opponent plays pawn to b6, which is a drawback mistake. Hopefully you guys know what a drawback mistake is, but basically the pawn on b7 was guarding the pawn on c6. Moving the pawn to b6, the c6 pawn is no longer guarded. So now we just need to take on c6. The knight is under attack, and that's another extra point for us. Okay, the opponent moved the knight all the way back to c8, targeting our pawn on c6. The thing is, though, I'm more focused on my development. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to castle my king, knowing that my bishop is left unprotected because the queen is not able to take the bishop. If the queen takes the bishop, it's a drawback mistake because the background would have been weak. In this position, notice how the queen and the knight is on the same diagonal and we have the dark squared bishop. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to play the move bishop to b5, and this is basically pinning the knight, and my queen on c3 is already putting pressure on the knight. Bishop to d7 was played. I have a very nice move here. Hopefully you guys are able to find it, but if you're good at math, you should be able to tell that a knight and a bishop is better than a rook. In this position, Black has two pieces guarding the knight on c6. We have two pieces attacking the knight on c6. We're able to win material by using a tactic called removing the guard. All I need to do is sacrifice my rook on d7, and then once the king takes, we take on c6. And not only do we get back the knight, we're also forking the queen and the rook. So we're getting even more material. So the queen take, let's just take on c6. The queen has to move, we take the rook, swing the other rook in the game, and deliver or checkmate. Okay, the queen moves out the way. Let's grab the rook. Queen takes g2 was played. We're now going for checkmate. This is the only piece that is not in the game. Let's play the move rook to e1. Now I'm threatening a checkmate because my queen on c3 covers the escaping square that my opponent's king could move to. Queen takes f2 was played, which means that's just checkmate. Let's keep going. Our opponent is now 285 and we are 308. We already played e4, so I'm going to play d4 this time around. This is the England gambit that my opponent is playing. Let's just take the free pawn on e5. I'm going to be showing you guys how to defeat the England gambit, but then my opponent plays queen to h4. I'm assuming he's trying to play bishop to c5, going for some early checkmates. But these are the types of moves that you're going to be seeing at the 285 level. Now, this is definitely breaking principles because you don't want to be developing the queen this early. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gain a tempo on the queen, developing my knight to f3 and attacking the queen at the same time. Now my opponent has to move the queen again because you don't necessarily want to be moving the same piece more than once in the opening. But if you develop your queen too early, this is what will happen. And then queen to e4 was played. This is not how you should be playing chess. Keep in mind, don't move the same piece more than once. Don't develop the queen too early because now I'm able to play the move knight c3. I'm developing my pieces, but I'm gaining tempo on the opponent's queen. Queen to b4. Okay, now queen to b4. From here, I should be able to play e4, develop my bishop. But let's play the move pawn to a3. Let's keep forcing the opponent to move the queen over and over and over. And then the queen went all the way back to e7. And then now I'll just continue with my development. Let's play pawn to e4. Knight d5 attacking the queen would have been fine. Knight c6 was played. Now that my opponent has two pieces attacking e5 and I only have one piece guarding e5, now I'm going to play knight to d5 attacking the queen. Now the opponent also has to be careful because I'm also threatening knight c7, which is a very nice fork. The only move that black could play in this position that does not lose is putting the queen all the way back to d8. But queen to e6 was played, and this is now just a beautiful royal fork. Forking the queen, forking the king, and the rook. The king now has to move to either e7 or d8, but doesn't really matter where the king goes. I'll just take the queen, and now we're just winning. So pawn takes was played. Let's just finish our development at this point. Let's go bishop to b5, targeting the knight. Like any trades that we do in this position is just going to be very good for us. Okay, bishop to d6 was played. I guess my opponent is just giving up at this point because that's just a free bishop. And I decided to take with the pawn because I wanted to cover these, but the opponent resigns. Let's keep climbing up the ladder. We're now 315. The opponent is 302. D4 was played, and let's just play D5. Let's just keep it simple. I'm expecting some London system. Knight C3 was played. Maybe the opponent is going to be playing the Joe Bava London, but let's just develop our knight to F6 here. Knight F3. The opponent is just developing their pieces very normally. I'm also going to be doing the same thing. Now, keep in mind that our goal is to develop all of our pieces. And as I said, at this level, Just focus on your development. Don't try to win, and the opponent will do all the heavy lifting. Because pawn to e4 was just a counting issue. Like I have three pieces on the e4 pawn. The opponent only has one piece guarding the pawn. So once I take this pawn on e4, it's just a free pawn, and I'm attacking this knight on f3. Knight to g5 was played. Now, the knight is targeting my pawn on e4, but I'm already guarding it twice. He's attacking it twice, though. Now, there's a principle called the principle of neutralization that we want to ensure that we apply. And it basically states whenever a piece is in your half of the board, you want to immediately get those pieces out of your half. So now I'm attacking the knight. He is forced to put his knight on the edge of the board because if he puts his knight, well, if he takes my pawn, then he's just going to be losing. Let's see what he does. Okay, he pulls the knight back to c6, and I'm now just going to continue with my development. I'm going to play the move pawn to e6 with ideas of developing my bishop, developing my knight, castling my king. Very, very simple chess. And again, as I mentioned, just focus on development and the opponent will do the heavy lifting for you. Because I have what? Three pieces guarding the square. White only has two pieces guarding the pawn. So once I take the pawn on d5, that's just another free pawn. And again, like my plan is to develop my pieces. All I'm trying to do is develop my bishop, develop my knight, castle my king. But if my opponent wants to be kind and give me free material in the process, then I'm going to take it. Okay, bishop f4 was a development move. I'm also going to be developing my bishop, and I'm also pinning the opponent's knight to the king. From here, I'm trying to get my king castle, develop my knight. Bishop to e5 was played, and the principle that my opponent just break is moving the same piece more than once in the opening. We don't want to be doing that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the move knight c6, developing my knight, gaining a tempo on the bishop, and as we said, focus on development. The opponent will do the blunders. Okay, bishop to b5 is not bad because I'm not able to take this bishop due to the pin. But I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board. That was my intention anyways. And I'm ahead by 2 pawns. I was expecting my opponent to take and then castle, but he decided to immediately castle, which means the bishop on e5 is just unprotected and we're just going to be taking the free bishop. Now, as I mentioned before, anything up to the 500 level, you just need to know how to count. You just need to know how to develop, and the opponent does all the work for you. So pawn to a3 was played. My bishop is under attack. The thing is, I'm ahead by so much material. I want to just start trading all the pieces off the board. Let's start by taking the knight on f3. Bishops are better than knights, but if you're ahead by like 3 points, I was expecting my opponent to take back the bishop. He didn't even take back the bishop. Now, I'm just doing this to show you guys, like if anybody's struggling to cross 400, you should know exactly what's happening now. Now I'm attacking the rook. I'm expecting the rook to move. The rook is going to be attacking my bishop, and then I'm just going to move my bishop out the way. I'm now ahead by 9 entire points. I'm basically ahead by a queen, and my opponent still has his queen. But the opponent resigns. Let's keep climbing. Now we're 323. The opponent is 339, and now we're switching back to e4. This is called the Pierre defense. Let's just play d4. I'm just going to put 2 pawns in the center of the board, and we're doing the same. Okay, pawn to f6. Never be playing moves like pawn to f6. Like I've said this a lot, but I just want you guys to understand that when a move like f6 is played, it exposes this diagonal pointing towards the king, and it could lead to some very nasty checkmates. But let me just play the move knight c3. Let me just develop my knight. Knight h6 is also not a principled move, and the opponent's king is already about to go on the run. Let's play the move bishop takes h6. Yes, bishops are better than knights, but if you're able to double up the opponent's pawn and further expose the king like this, then it should be leading to some checkmates. Now, queen to h5 is going to check the king and just force the opponent's king to move. But I'm trying to set up a little checkmating idea. I'm going to first check on b5. He needs to block with the pawn, but okay, he did block with the pawn. I'm still going to be checking on a5. My idea was if he had blocked with the knight or the bishop, then he would have just been gotten checkmate. But king d7, my bishop is now under attack. Let's just pull the bishop back. And then from here, my goal is to develop my knight, castle my king, and open the center of the board. And when I say open the center of the board, I'm trying to trade as much pawns as possible. The more pawns I'm able to trade, then the easier it is going to be to get to the opponent's king. Let's play knight to f3 here, finishing our development. Rook to g1 was played. The rook is attacking my unprotected pawn, but now I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board and I protect the pawn at the same time. Now my goal is to open the center. I'm also trying to get my rooks in the game, especially the D and the E file, because I'm assuming these are the squares that are going to be, or these are the files that are going to be open. Okay, the opponent decided to play rook to g5. You know, it attacks my queen, but at the 300 level, they still make these types of blunders where they just missed that your piece was guarding the square. Now my knight is just going to take the rook, and I'm just ahead in material. But it's the same plan. We're still trying to open the center of the board. So I'm going to play them. It's either e5 or d5, to be honest. There's also f4 that I like. Any pawn trades, basically usually helps in opening the center of the board. Okay, bishop to g7 was played. That's not a bad move because my opponent is attacking my unprotected pawn. But to respond to this, I'm going to play the move pawn to e5. You know, I'm basically blocking the bishop, guarding my pawn, still trying to trade as many pawns out of the center as possible, because the more pawns I trade, the easier it is going to be to get to my opponent's king. Okay, the king moves out the way. And now I'm going to simply get my rook in the game. I'm also putting my rook on the same file as my opponent's queen. So he has to be careful about some tactical ideas that could happen. Okay, knight d7, the opponent is developing. Now let's just take on d6 with check. The e file is now open, so I could always use my rook to occupy the e file, but I still need to be aware of the bishop attacking this pawn. So let's just move the pawn forward. Now, what the opponent needs to do here is pawn c5. Knight f6 can also work because my queen is now under attack. Okay, that's definitely not a bad move. But let's pull the queen back to e2. Bishop to g4 would be a very nice move if the opponent finds it. I'm not expecting him to find it though, but if he does, which he didn't, it looks like he plays h5 because he wants to play bishop to g4, and he missed that the knight was already covering the g4 square, which is weird. Let's just play h3. This is called a prophylactic move, you know, just to prevent the bishop from going to g4, skewering our queen and our rook, and then we're going to be continuing. So now he plays g4. He's basically saying he wants me to take, then his bishop could take. But I'm not going to do that. Let's just take on c6 here, further opening the position so that way we could get to the opponent's king. Okay, the pawn takes. How are we going to get to this king now? I'm not necessarily seeing it, but because we're ahead by 2 points, let's go knight to e4. Let's start trading some of the pieces off the board. That's a very nice move, pawn takes h3. That's a very nice. Should have. Okay, yeah, that's a nice move because my idea was to play g3, but bishop to g4 is just very, very strong, and bishop to g4 is coming next. So I need to get out. This guy's playing very well, to be honest. For 300, I was expecting some blunders already. Let me just move my queen out the way so that way if the bishop goes there, I could just move my rook. Now I'm only ahead by 1 point. Okay, pawn d5 attacks my knight. Let's take on f6. And I'm still trying to open the position, which means I'm still going to be playing moves like pawn to c4. Because remember, the pawn trades benefits us mostly. I think I had a very nice move, queen to a5 check. It wouldn't necessarily win his queen, or maybe, yeah, maybe it could have won his queen. Bishop to g4 attacks my rook. And now if I check and the king moves, I'm not able to take. So let me just move my rook out the way first. The good thing is my rook is on the same line as the opponent's king, which means if I take, this pawn is not going to be able to capture. Check. Let's move the king out of check. I don't know why this guy's playing as if he's trying to checkmate me. Okay, queen to h4 was played. I think I have to play g3 to attack the queen. Yo, this guy's 339. This is the strongest 339 I've seen. I mean, he has to move his queen now, but he's playing some chess. I'm not gonna lie. This guy's playing some chess. Okay, bishop to g1 check is a good try. That's definitely a good try. What he's seeing is if I take with my king, he takes on g2, and it doesn't lead to any checkmate though. But I'm just going to take with the rook, to be honest. So he basically just gave me a free bishop, and this queen is still under attack, which he was forced to move. Now I take on d5, and his c6 pawn is also under attack. So I'm thinking about all the ways how I'm planning on checkmating him. And I think it's definitely time to deliver our checkmate. I'm going to start by playing the move queen to a5, just checking the king. And then eventually, I would like my rook and my pawn to join the attack. It's all depending on what the opponent plays. For example, now that he plays king to b7, I'm going to take with the pawn because it comes with check. The king is now forced to move. Uh, he is able to move to either a7 or b8. Okay, he chose to move to a7, not bad. And if I'm able to play queen c7 and his queen is not there, then that would be a checkmate. So I'm going to play the move rook to e1, attacking the queen, attempting a removing the guard tactic. Okay, he did everything for me. He puts the actual queen on c7, which means that's just a checkmate. Let's keep climbing. We're now 331. The opponent is 336. E4 was played, and let's just play e5. Let's keep things simple. I'm definitely expecting some good development moves. G3 was definitely not necessary, but let's just develop our pieces. Let's play knight f6, hit the pawn. As we said, the goal is to develop all four of our minor pieces. Knight c3, we play knight c6. Now we have 2 out of 4 minor pieces that are already developed. And then the opponent plays knight d5, which is breaking an opening principle. For one, you don't want to be moving the same piece more than once in the opening. But two, the knight on c3 was guarding this pawn on e4. This is called a drawback mistake, by the way, because now we're able to take on e4. And just like that, we're ahead by a pawn on move 4. Okay, queen to g4. That's a very aggressive move. I mean, the opponent is developing the queen a bit too early, though. My knight is under attack. I'm just going to pull my knight back to f6, to be honest. I'm hitting the queen, hitting the knight. I'm expecting him to take on f6, and, that would just be a trade. And then once the knight takes, my queen takes, and now I'm just going to be finishing my development. I want to develop this bishop, threatening some checkmate ideas. The queen is also on the same diagonal as my bishop here. I'm also trying to get my king out the center of the board. Okay, knight to f3, not bad. No, I'm not able to play bishop to c5, but the move I'm about to play is called a discovered attack. And players at the lower level usually fail to see these types of moves because my bishop is on the same diagonal as his queen. And once I move my pawn to d5, it just looks as if I'm moving my pawn, which is why, as I told you guys, it's just hard for people to see this covered attack. He decided to move this pawn instead, and there goes his queen, and his knight is also under attack. So he moves the knight out the way, but the knight is on the edge of the board. Now, I want to play pawn to g5 to chase away the knight, trap the knight. But first, I'm going to play the move knight takes b4. And I'm actually threatening a checkmate. I'm not just threatening a fork because my light squared bishop is protecting all the possible running squares. So now that he plays rook to b1, that's just a checkmate. Let's keep climbing. We're now 339. The opponent is 335. E4 was played. I played E5 just now, so I'm going to be playing the Scandinavian defense. Usually at the lower level, you don't want to be playing the Scandi because it breaks an opening principle, which is developing the queen too early. But, well, if you had taken, I would have shown you guys how to do it. But he decided to check on b5. Usually, you don't want to be checking the opponent's king this early, especially with your bishop, because now I'm just going to play the move pawn to c6, and I'm now attacking the bishop. Now the bishop just has to move out the way, and I'm already gaining tempo on the opponent's bishop using the black pieces. So the bishop goes back to a4, didn't even try to guard the pawn on e4. So let's just take the pawn on e4. We're already ahead by a pawn, like 3 moves in, and the plan is still simple. As I explained to you guys, is just focus on developing your pieces, ensure that you know how to count, ensure that you know how to identify hanging pieces. And once you focus on development, the opponent will do all the work for you. B4 was definitely not necessary. He wants to play B5 and just continue is attack on my king, but there's no attack there on my king. So I'm not even going to try to prevent him from doing this. I'm just going to be focusing on my development. He did play pawn to b5. Now, these are unnecessary pawn moves. He needs to be focusing on his development, but he's playing unnecessary pawn moves. Let me develop my bishop, and I'm also developing my bishop, gaining a tempo on the opponent's queen. It's also not very easy to respond. He plays pawn to f3, but my pawn is there to take. If he takes with the knight is pinned, but he took with the pawn, so my bishop is under attack. Let's just pull the bishop back to f5. I still have two pieces developed, and I was expecting him to take on c6. Now I take back on c6 with the knight. Now I have three pieces developed. He only has his bishop that is developed, and his king seems to be a bit weak. Okay, he's developing more pieces. He decided to develop his bishop. I need to develop as well. Let's play pawn to e6, not pawn to e5 because my knight is pinned and I don't want the bishop to take. So bishop to c5 is coming next. Queen to b6. I was actually thinking about playing queen to b6 to attack the unprotected bishop, but I'm just going to move this bishop to either c5, d6, e7, castle my king, and by then he's going to be blundering something. Okay, d4 is not bad. D4 is not bad. I'm going to pose a problem to the opponent. I'm going to play the move queen to a4 check, checking the king and attacking the unprotected bishop. There's definitely a lot of ways to guard this. He could play pawn c3, blocking the check, the queen guard the bishop. He could play knight c3, developing the knight, and the knight guards the bishop. But whenever you're playing, you always want to ensure that you pose problem to the opponent. So he found it. He plays pawn to c3. Now, I just need to finish my development. Let's go bishop to d6. You could say all my pieces are developed because I also managed to move my queen to a very active square. So once I get my king out the center, every piece except my rooks are going to be active. So basically how it works is you develop the minor pieces, you get your king castled, you move your queen so that way you can connect your rooks, you swing your rooks in the game, and then you can basically start the attack. And if you're not able to find any open lines to put your rooks on, you want to move your pawn forward using pawn breaks to open lines for your rooks. Okay, so he puts his knight on the edge of the board, and I have a very nice tactic in this position. Hopefully, you were able to find it, but it's based on removing the guard. I want you to notice how this bishop on b2 is overworked. It's guarding the knight on a3, but it's also guarding the pawn on c3. My bishop attacks this knight, my queen attacks this pawn. So all I'm going to do in this position is take the knight on c3, and I'm basically trying to pull the bishop away from guarding the pawn, and then I'm going to be taking on c3, which checks the king and attack the unprotected bishop at the same time. So he took, let's take on c3. This is called a fork, by the way. He was forced to move the king. Now we take the bishop and we're ahead by 5 points. Rook to c1 was played. There are two pieces attacking my knight. I'm only guarding it once, but because I'm ahead by 5 points, I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board. Because if he takes on, okay, he also decided to take with the rook, which is bad. Like, why wouldn't he take with the bishop first? Let's just take the rook. And then once he takes and attack my rook, I just need to move my rook out the way, and I'm attacking his bishop. He's also about to lose his bishop or lose his queen. He pulls the bishop back to e4, which is not a good counting square. But I want you guys to notice how the queen and the king, they're on the same rank. Whenever you see two pieces on the same rank, you should start looking for tactics because now I'm able to play the move rook to c1. I'm pinning the queen to the king. So now I'm winning the queen. If he takes the rook, I take the queen. If he doesn't do anything, I'm still going to take. So let's take. The king is now forced to move. And now I'm just going to be delivering my checkmate. He's also about to lose all his material as well. But the opponent left the game. Let's keep climbing. We're now 347. The opponent is 373. And I'm just gonna play knight to f3. Like I'm just gonna develop my knight because I don't want you guys to just try to copy my openings. I want you guys to understand what to do in the opening. So now he plays pawn a6. I'm just gonna develop the other knight. If you understand that all I'm trying to do is get all four minor pieces out, then it doesn't necessarily matter how I take these pieces out. Once I take them out, then I should be doing fine. So he's making a lot of pawn moves on the edge of the board. Like he's not trying to control the central squares. Let's play pawn to d4 in this position though. Okay, bishop to d7 was played. Let's keep developing. Now I have 3 out of 4 pieces developed. He only has one of his pieces developed. Pawn to d6 was played. Now I play pawn to e3 because what I'm trying to do is develop my last piece, get my king out the center of the board. Knight f6 is not bad. Let's develop the bishop. All four of my minor pieces are now developed. He has two minor pieces that is developed. And then pawn to h6 was definitely an unnecessary pawn move. Like, I wasn't really planning on putting anything on the g5 square anyways. Let me just get my king out the center of the board. I want you guys to notice all I'm doing is developing. He now plays pawn to g5, attacking my bishop. Let's just pull the bishop back. And because my king is castled and all my minor pieces are developed, it's time to get my major pieces in the game. In order for me to get my major pieces in the game, I need to start looking for some pawn breaks, like some pawn trades. But he's actually trying to chase away my knight, which is not necessarily a terrible way to play. Knight a4 is fine, but I don't like to put my knight on the edge of the board unless I'm seeing exactly how I'm going to take my knights off the edge. So for now, let me just retreat the knight, and then eventually I should be getting some pawn breaks to open the center of the board. Now he plays a5, and the first pawn break that I'm going to go with is pawn to c3 because this is the closest pawn to my pieces. And notice what happens once he takes. Now my knight is able to take, but then my rook is going to get access to the c file. And then he made another mistake, which is giving up his bishop for a knight. You don't want to be giving up your bishops for knights when you're playing. Now I'm just going to take with the queen, not the pawn, so that way I expose my king. And taking with the queen also connect my rook. So I'm doing very well from a development standpoint. And my queen is attacking his unprotected rook. Remember what I said about hanging pieces? This is all you need all the way up to 500. Development, counting, hanging pieces, and you should be able to hit 500. Let's just grab the hanging rook. So pawn takes d4 was played. Let's play pawn takes d4, just taking back the pawn. If I'm able to put my rook on the same line as the king, that would be good. Putting my rook on c1 would be good because these are the only two open files that I'm seeing in my position. And then pawn to e5 was a counting issue. It was also a bad move because the opponent is actively helping me to open the center. Let's take on e5. It's slightly tricky though, but once he takes on e5, my bishop is under attack, but I'm actually not going to be moving my bishop. Once I take on e5, my bishop attacks both these knights, which means if his queen takes my bishop, he's basically at risk of losing both of his knights. So he has to be very, very careful. Notice how my opponent also did not castle their king. Okay, bishop to d6 was played. The opponent is now trying to trade some pieces off the board. Maybe he's also trying to get castled. Let's take here. And then once the queen takes, my rooks are going to be joining the game with tempo. So I'm going to play the move rook to e1 check. Now I'm forcing his king to move somewhere. And then once the rook move, I'm going to play the move rook to d1. Because now once I play rook to d1, if you notice, every single pieces that I have is now in the game. Especially if you're playing and you notice that you're able to occupy open files for your rooks, then you're doing perfectly fine. Okay, now the opponent is trying to run the king to safety. But now I'm just trying to trade a few pieces off the board. Let's play knight e4, hit the queen, hit the knight, which means once the knight takes, I'm going to take with the queen. And this is going to help with my conversion. The more I trade, the easier it is going to be for me to win the game. Okay, the queen moves over to c7. Let's take on f6 because the king does not belong on f6. Now I'm trying to look for some ways to checkmate the king. It's not necessarily easy though. I'm going to start by bringing my queen back in the center of the board. I'm threatening to play queen to d4, which would be a very nice skewer on his king. Queen to f5 check is also an idea. It's all depending on what my opponent plays here. Okay, knight to d7 was played. I'm going to start by playing queen to d4 check. I'm not necessarily winning the rook, by the way, because knight to e5 is definitely a possibility. If knight e5, though, I'm thinking of playing the move pawn to f4, which would be pressuring the pinned knight. And, you guys already know this. Once you're pinning a piece, you want to ensure that you're applying pressure to that pinned piece. So he did play knight e5, and I am going to play pawn to f4, applying pressure to the pinned knight. So now I'm just threatening to take the knight on the next move. The thing is, though, if he takes, which he did, now my queen takes with check, the king has to move, and I have two pieces attacking this knight. So, well, he could also put his king on e5, but he's not going to be surviving with the king on e6. So, king e6, now my plan is to force his king away from guarding the knight. So, here's what I'm going to do. Bishop to c4 check. It's a very nice move. If the queen takes, I could always take the queen, but rook to e5 is going to be a checkmate. The king is not able to go here or here, so the king has to step back to e7, and I'm just going to win the knight. No, I'm just winning the game. Okay, I lied. There's actually a checkmate here. If you're able to find this checkmate, then you know some ideas about tactic. But because my rook is on the same line as the king, the knight on e5 is pinned, which means I'm attacking f7 twice. His knight is not able to take on f7. Once I play the move, queen takes, and that's a checkmate. Let's keep climbing up the ladder. We're now 356. The opponent is 368. We already played e5 and Scandi, so let's hit him with the Huracan defense. Bishop to c4 is not usually good because I'm able to play d5. I'm immediately attacking the bishop, which means once I take, I'm gaining a tempo on the bishop. So I'm basically forcing him to move the same piece more than once in the opening. And now I'm just going to play pawn to e5 because now I have two very strong pawns in the center of the board. And one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is whenever you see positions like these where you're able to move your pawns forward and attack the opponent's knight, just keep forcing them to move over and over. It's going to be very beneficial for your position. Now, pawn f5 is an idea, but I don't want to have any issues castling my king. So let's just play knight to f6 in this position. If he takes on f6, then he would have been moving the same piece too many times, which is why he plays pawn to d3. But let's just continue with our development. Now I have two pieces developed. The opponent has three pieces developed, but now I'm going to play bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the queen. So we're both just trying to develop all our pieces here. He's definitely playing some chess. Pawn to h3 attacks my bishop. Let's pull the bishop back, maintaining the pin on the knight. And if he plays g4, which he did, I go back to g6. And usually in these types of positions, it's not usually safe for the opponent to castle their king on the king side anymore. Now, knight to g5 doesn't really attack anything, to be honest. Like, my bishop is already guarding f7. So putting the knight on g5 is, I could say that's wasting time. But let me just use the time to develop my bishop, get my king out the center. If he plays h4, trying to remove the guard of my f7 pawn, then I may play h6. But he still decided to take on f7. Maybe he thinks there was a fork, but he just did not see my bishop on g6, basically. Now I'm just going to take, and I'm ahead by a piece. Now he plays bishop g5, and because I'm ahead by a piece, the goal is to start trading the pieces off the board. So the first trade I'm going to do is play bishop takes b3, just trading the pieces off the board. And then once he takes, I'm going to play knight takes e4, just trading the pieces off the board. And he should have actually played bishop takes e7 first, because now his bishop is hanging, and now I'm actually ahead by not one, but two pieces. From here, I'm just going to castle. And once I castle, my rook is going to get this open file on the king. And then I'm going to be playing queen f6, and I'm going to be delivering a checkmate. So a4 didn't do anything. Let's get the king out the center of the board. Pawn to h4 is attacking my bishop, but I'm not going to be moving my bishop out the way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play queen to f6. This is called a battery. Two pieces on the same file doing the same thing. And remember I told you guys about attacking pawns or square around the opponent's king? He decided to take the bishop, and he did not see that that's just a checkmate. Let's keep climbing up the ladder. We're now 364. The opponent is 347. Okay, I've been playing a lot of d5, so I'm going to be playing knight f6. I want to play something like the King's Indian defense, something aggressive. Knight c3, this is a sign that he's playing the Joe Bava London. I'm going to play the move pawn to d5 here because I'm trying to prevent white from playing pawn to e4. And then pawn to f3. Pawn to f3 is interesting here. He's actually really trying to play e4. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to play the move knight c6 because I'm targeting his d4 pawn, which means if he plays e4, I'm going to be able to take, and if he takes back, I'm going to be able to take his pawn on d4. Otherwise, I could also play moves like pawn to e5, just bursting open the center of the board because he plays f3. So he did play e4. Let's take on e4. If he takes back, I'm going to take on d4. So it would actually be best for him to push the pawn, which he didn't. So now once I take on e4, I'm just ahead by a pawn. From here, what I want to do is I want to play moves like e5, just cementing my knight in the center of the board, and then finish my development. Okay, pawn to e5 is not a terrible move. It's actually good because I'm actually not able to move my knight anywhere forward. So I have to pull my knight onto the back rank. I'm ahead by a pawn though, so I'm chilling. And I'm gonna finish my development soon. I'm expecting something like knight f3 or even bishop to e3. My knight is now under attack twice. Instead of just moving my knight, I'm gonna play the move pawn to c5, just guarding my knight. And I'm expecting something like knight to f3 or knight e2. But if that happens, then I'm just going to develop my bishop, pinning the knight to the queen. Okay, knight to a4 was definitely not necessary. I see his idea though. He's trying to take the pawn on c5, but it would have been best for him to continue with his development. I'm actually not going to try to guard the pawn, and instead I'm going to develop my bishop to f5. Now I have two pieces targeting his c2 pawn. He's only guarding the c2 pawn with his queen. So now he has to be very, very careful. If he gets greedy trying to win material, he could be losing his rook. Okay, he did take. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take on c2 with check. It's literally funny. I think he's able to sack the queen and then play bishop to b5, and then I'm going to be forced to take with the queen. Otherwise, once he moves his king, I'll just take his rook. He moves the king out the way. If I take the rook, he checks. I block the check, he takes. I could be losing the game. I have to be very careful. I'm actually going to be taking the queen. And then once the rook take, I, okay, it's very tricky. I don't want to allow bishop to b5 check. I think I'm able to play e6 though. And then if bishop to b5 check, I move the king. Okay, bishop to b5 check is a huge threat. Let's play a6. Let's play a prophylactic move. And I'm trying to take this bishop on e3 next. I'm trying to play e6. I don't think I'm completely winning this position, but I'm ahead by a pawn. So that's enough to win once I start trading the pieces off the board. Rook to d2 was played, attacking my knight. My knight is not unprotected, so I'm going to play pawn to e6 because now I'm basically trying to develop my bishop, and he has to be careful because there's some tactical ideas in this position. For example, the bishop is the main defender of this knight on c5. So if he allows me to take the bishop, it would be a removing the guard tactic, and I will be winning the knight. But he decided to play knight d7, jumping the knight into d7. I'm thinking of just castling my king. And if he checks on b6, I play king c7. Yeah, let's just get the king out the center of the board. If he takes on f8, I should be able to take back. This check will not be leading to a checkmate, by the way, but I think we're going to be going into one of those end games where I have to grind out the position. And my opponent is only 347. So being at 347 and playing chess like this is definitely not bad. Oh, he took on c2. He just forgot that my bishop was guarding the knight. That's mad. Now I'm just need to develop my knight and my bishop, and I'll be completely winning. Like these players are not terrible enough. They just do weird blunders, which is why I'm telling you guys, you don't necessarily have to be looking for a lot of ways to win or looking for the knockout punch. Just ensure that you develop your position, put your pieces on good squares, and your opponent will do the work for you. Knight to f3 develops the knight. Let's play knight to h6, also developing my knight. I'm putting my knight on the edge of the board, by the way, knowing that my knight is not going to stay on the edge of the board. Knight to d4 was played, and okay, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening here. Here's what I'm going to do. The knight is attacking my bishop. I'm actually going to play the move knight g4, checking the king and attacking the bishop on e3. The king is now forced to move. Once the king move, I'm able to take the bishop, guard my bishop, and then if his king take, I don't take this knight because his knight takes my bishop. So I play the move bishop to c5. I'm pinning this knight, so I'm actively doing a pin and a fork at the same time. So he has to move one, well, he has to move this knight out the way, but there's nothing he could do to protect his d4 knight. So I'm just going to be capturing the knight on d4 next. Okay, the king went back to d2, which is not, it's not a terrible move, but I'm going to be taking both of these knights. He's only going to be taking my bishop. Let's play the move rook takes knight with check, and then I'm assuming he's going to take my bishop, and then my king is going to take his knight. And then from there, I'm going to swing this rook in the game. Once I swing this rook in the game, then we should be going for some checkmating threats. If he doesn't get checkmate though, then maybe I have to just take his pieces and promote one of my pawns to a queen, and then he's going to be getting checkmated. Bishop to d3. Let's play rook to d8. Now I have two pieces attacking the bishop. He only has the king guarding it. I mean, rook to c8 would have also been good. And usually moves like bishop to h7 is just a blunder. Like, try not to be falling for these types of tricks. But once I play pawn to g6, his bishop is actually now trapped and will never be able to join the game again. And then I'm just going to play the move rook h8 and capture the bishop. There's some stuff he could do to try to not lose the bishop. For example, he could play rook to f1 and then attack this pawn. So that way, if my rook attacks the bishop, he takes the pawn. He decided to play h4, but that doesn't work though. Because now I'm able to play rook h8, the bishop can't move. And if he plays h5 and I take, he's also not able to take because he's going to simply lose his rook. So he decided to sacrifice the bishop. Let's just take the bishop. King c3. Okay, now I'm just going to take on a4. Like, once we trade the rooks off the board, it becomes easier for me to win. Because all I need to do is just take the pawn like this, and then promote my pawn, and then I'm going to deliver the mate. Okay, let's take with check, forcing the king to move. The king moves. Now my bishop is under attack. But once I check here, the king has to move, and then I'm gonna have two pieces attacking the pawn. Now I take the pawn, the king has to move again, and then I'm just gonna be okay. Now that the king goes here, I have to be careful to not stalemate the game. Because if I move the pawn, the king has nowhere to go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move the rook with check. That's a discovered attack. He's forced to put his king on the a4 square, and then I'm going to try to get my pawn to b5, and that's how he's going to be getting checkmated. For example, just move my king out the way first, and then once I play b5, so a4, there's checkmating two moves here. Pawn to b5 check, the king has to move to a5, and that's just a checkmate. Let's keep going. We're now 372. The opponent is 365. Let's play e4. e5, let's develop the knight, hit the pawn. This is called the Petrov defense, by the way. And I'm actually just going to take the pawn on e5. Usually the correct move is to play pawn to d6. Taking back on e4 could lead to some very dangerous stuff. For example, my opponent could actually be losing his knight. But let's just play the move queen to e2 here. Queen to e2 attacks the knight. Moving the knight away is completely lost, which he did move the knight away. There's a way in which we can gain the opponent's queen here. Try to find it. But notice how my queen is on the same line as the king. This is called an X-ray. Because my queen is on the same line as the king, I'm going to be using what is called a discovered attack. Moving my knight out the way, so that way my queen gives the check, but my knight attacks the queen. The opponent now has to block the check with either the bishop or the queen, it doesn't matter. He decided to use the queen, but now my knight simply takes the queen, and we're already completely winning. So after bishop takes e7, let's just develop our knight. I'm trying to play knight d5 to pp on the pp. So he plays knight to c6. I guess he's trying to play knight d4 to attack my queen. I definitely need to finish my development here though. So wait, before I do that, let's play knight d5. Because if he plays knight d4, he's mated. If he castle, okay. I was actually thinking of I'm still gonna take the bishop with check, but once the knight takes, I'm actually not able to take the knight due to this pin. So let me just play pawn to d3 and prepare to get my development up. Notice how his rook is on the same line as my queen and my king. Now I need to be aware of some tactical ideas. But let's just play bishop to e3 here. Knight c6. Now I'm going to castle my king. And then from here, I'm going to be developing my last piece. Knight b5. I guess the opponent wants to play knight d4. Doesn't do anything though. So let's focus on developing. Let's play the move pawn to g3 just to fianchetto the bishop. Knight d4 attacks the queen. If I take his knight, well, if I take his knight, I'm going to lose my queen because my bishop is pinned. So I'm going to play the move queen all the way to h5. And I'm also getting my pieces closer to his king. So he has to start worried about some checkmating stuff. Pawn to g6. Now I'm going to play queen to g5, not queen to h6 because of knight f5, but eventually I'm going to finish my development and the attack is going to be a bit more smooth. Okay, he still decided to play h6. So let's just take the free pawn. I guess he really wants to play knight f5. But after knight f5, I'll still put my queen on g5. And then he's gonna okay. I'm not I'm not 100% sure what this guy's doing. But let's go bishop to g2. Let's develop our bishop. If I could get my queen here while my bishop guards the d4 square, then that would be a checkmate. So that's basically my plan. And because I'm ahead by a queen, any trade that I do will be benefiting me. So knight takes e5. I'm going to take on c6 because I'm trying to trade the pieces off the board. Knight takes c6. Now I'm going to play the move rook to e1. My rook is on the same line as his rook, which is unprotected. And now that he plays knight b4, this is where we conclude the game. Because what I'm going to do here is he's also attacking my pawn on a2, but that doesn't really do anything. Once I play bishop to d4, I'm not only threatening checkmate on g7, I'm also threatening checkmate on h8, and I'm threatening to capture his rook and deliver a checkmate. So him checking on a2 here, I'm just going to move my king to b1, attacking his knight, and the next move has to be a checkmate. He decided to take on e1, but we're not going to be taking back. I mean, queen to h8 is a checkmate, but that's also a checkmate. We're now 380. The opponent is 372. And we have played e5, d5, c6. Let's play d6. Let's play the pure defense. Pawn to d4, we play knight to f6, targeting the pawn on e4. And from here, we're going to play pawn g6, bishop g7, castling the king. This is usually the typical setup in the pure defense. Let's go bishop to g7. Bishop g5, let's simply castle the king. And now the opponent plays bishop to b5. Now, usually it's good to put your pieces on the opponent's half of the board, but when you put your pieces on the opponent's half of the board too quickly, then it's going to be easy for me to start attacking those pieces and chasing those pieces away. And if you keep in mind, you don't want to be moving the same piece more than once in the opening. So now that I'm able to play pawn c6 attacking the bishop is now forced to move, which means I have the tempo. The bishop goes back to a5, and I'm actually going to try a very nice trap that I want you guys to do in your game. I'm going to play the move pawn to a5, and I'm actually secretly trying to trap the opponent's bishop. He puts the bishop back on b3. Now I play pawn to b5, which means I'm not only threatening to play a4 trapping the bishop, I'm also threatening to play b4 removing the guard of the e4 pawn. But he basically didn't see any of them. So let's just play a4 and trap the bishop. And just like that, we are about to be ahead by a piece. He took with the knight. Let's take with the pawn, hit the bishop. Now the bishop gets the c4 square, but the pawn on e4 is now hanging. So let's just capture the free pawn. I'm also attacking this bishop on g5. It's being guarded by the knight though. He saw that. He pulls the bishop back. We're ahead by a piece, so all trades are good for us here. I like the idea of bishop to g4 though, because it immediately pins the opponent's knight to the queen. And there's some tactical ideas here, like if he's not careful, he could be getting forked. Okay, he plays queen to e1. Basically, what he did is he moves the queen out the way, breaking the pin. But once I take his knight on f3, he's now forced to take back, which means he's actively exposing his king. And my knight is under attack. I'm not really seeing good scores for my knight, except just pulling it back to f6. But we're still ahead by 3 points. I'm going to play knight d7, develop my last piece. His king is also exposed, so he is at risk of getting checkmated. Pawn to f4 was played. Let's develop our last piece. And Keep in mind, after you develop all your minor pieces, it's very important that you start thinking about your major pieces. Bishop back to d3 was played. I think my opponent is trying to play f5, which doesn't do anything. Let's play the move. Let's play the move rook to b8, putting my rook on the open file. I'm also attacking his unprotected b pawn, which is why he moved it forward. Let's just take here. And then once I take, I'm trying to get my f rook in the game. But because this pawn is unprotected, I'm going to play knight d5. My knight attacks the unprotected f4 pawn. My bishop attacks the unprotected d4 pawn. He plays f5. Now, if I take, his bishop is going to take, but I'm not going to take that pawn. And I'm sure you guys heard me saying to take is a mistake a lot. So let's take on d4, the unprotected pawn, and attack his rook. Now his rook is forced to move. And then once he moves the rook, my knight is able to join the attack, threatening this bishop, threatening a fork on f3. So now he's about to be in some real trouble. Rook to c1 was played, and as I mentioned, he's also attacking my unprotected pawn on c6. But once I play knight e5, not only do I guard the unprotected pawn, I attack the unprotected bishop, and I threaten to fork the king and the queen. He moves the bishop out the way, but knight to f3 is just a very nice fork. Ensure that you guys are doing your tactics, by the way. If you're not doing your tactics, then it's going to be very hard for you guys to be spotting these forks. The king moves. Let's just grab the queen here. And then once the rook takes, I'm now thinking of trying to set up some checkmates. But before we do that, let's just take this free pawn. Not just to take the pawn, but the g file is open and I could potentially get my rook on the g file. For example, moving the king over to h8, followed by rook to g8, and then his king is going to be under attack. So he pulls the rook back. Let's play rook to g8. His king is under attack. And okay, we're definitely trying to find some checkmates here. Let me start by playing the move queen to a5, attacking the unprotected bishop. I'm thinking of queen d2 to target this pawn. His bishop is guarding the pawn though, so I may have to do some removing the guard tactics. Okay, he moves the rook here. He saw what's happening. My bishop is under attack, but let's just play pawn to e5 and guard the bishop. Oh, what am I doing? That was a free. I could have actually not moved the bishop, take this bishop with a check on his king. And then once his king moved, rook to g1 could have led to a checkmate, but he still decided to resign. Our opponent is now 382. We are 388. D4 was played, and let's actually go with the England gambit. Let's have some fun. Okay, he plays d4. This is him declining the gambit, but it basically transposed into something else where I'm able to take on d4 and pull out his queen, assuming he's going to take with the queen. Otherwise, he's just going to be down by a pawn. Okay, that's what he's trying to do. He developed his queen way too early. Don't be developing your queen this early. Like, he's probably even going to be losing the queen. Maybe he wants to play bishop c4 and take on f7. Or he wants me to play pawn g6 so that way he's able to play queen to e5 and fork. But let's just play knight to f6. And now he's forced to move the queen again. Okay, queen to e5 check. Let's just block the check. He's basically helping me to develop, and his queen on e5 is definitely compromised there. Okay, he plays knight c3. I mean, he's trying to develop his knight, but my pawn covers the square. Let's just take the free knight. My idea, though, was to develop my knight and attack his queen. Now, he decided to take with the queen. That's a free pawn, by the way. But I'm actually going to play the move knight c6 because I want you guys to notice how his queen and his king is on the same diagonal. I don't want you guys to be missing these tactics. Now I'm able to play the move bishop to b4, pinning the queen to the king. So we're already just gaining a queen in this position. And I'm already ahead by a piece. He decided to sacrifice his bishop. That's not going to help him though. Like, he's just giving us more pieces. There's nothing he could do to get out of this spin. Okay, he gave up his queen. Let's take the queen. I'm also threatening to play knight c2, which is just going to be a fork, forking both his king and his rook. He didn't guard it, so let's take on c2. That's now just a fork. But the opponent resigns. Let's keep going. We're now at 396, the game that's going to take us to 400. Our opponent is 418, and they're playing the Scandinavian defense. Let's take on d5. Queen takes d5. Now we play knight c3, gaining the tempo on the queen. Okay, whenever people play the Scandinavian, no check that they play to attack your king will not work. Just block with the bishop. They're basically helping you to develop your pieces. No, I'm just going to go knight f3, castle, pawn d4, and he's going to be having a lot of issues developing. He plays pawn to g5 because he's predicting that I'm going to play knight to f3, so that way he's able to play pawn to g4. But I'm still going to do it. Let's just play knight to f3. If he plays g4, knight d4, and he's going to be the one who is forced to move away his queen. So he decided to immediately move away his queen. Yeah, this is what happens when you move your queen too much time in the opening. And this is why I don't recommend low-rated players to play the Scandinavian unless you watch my video on the exact way how to play the Scandinavian. Now his queen is under attack. Well, I think he's able to play queen to d6. I was expecting him to play queen c6, but he's not going to play queen c6. Queen c6 would be a very nice tactic that I could use to win his queen, but I forgot that he's able to play the move queen to d6. Queen to c5 could also work. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play c4 to guard my knight. So that way, if he attacks my knight on the next move, which he didn't, he decided to develop his bishop. But my plan was to play d4 to attack his queen. And again, like, I'm not seeing how I'm able to win his queen, but just because he's moving his queen so many times, helping me to develop, blocking the check and attack his queen, he's gonna lose his queen. Like once you develop your queen this early, you're gonna lose the queen. We predicted it. He puts his queen on his six, and that's just a very nice royal fort. Now he has to move his king. We're gonna take the queen. This is why you don't develop your queen too early, and then we're gonna be checkmating his king. He moves the king. Let's first grab the queen. Once he takes, let's not rush. Let's get our king out the center of the board first. And then he took on f3, which means once I take on f3, he's also about to lose his rook. I think he's just playing moves now without thinking about it because he lost his queen. Okay, he develops his knight. Let's grab the rook. And I want to get my queen in the game. I want to play bishop to a5. This is going to be checkmate in a few moves. Bishop h6. No, I get my queen in the game first. I want to play bishop a5 check. I'm also trying to get my queen to c6. So he plays knight to f6. Let's get the queen to c6 first. It's very important that we get our pieces as close as possible to the opponent's king. I'm now threatening a checkmate in two moves. So if his next move does not try to create some escape square for his king, then he's just going to be getting checkmated. Okay, he plays e6. That did create some escape for the king. But what I'm going to do is play bishop b4. I'm trying to cover the escaping squares that the king could go to. So that way, once I put my bishop on d6, check on c7, queen c8 is going to be a mate. So knight g4, we play bishop to d6 first because we're trying to cover the c7 square. And we are threatening a checkmate in two moves. Okay, he puts his knight on f6 and it's now GG's. I'm going to check on c7. The king has to go to e8 and queen c8 is going to be a checkmate. So let's check on c7. The king has to go here and that's just a checkmate.